So chapter 8, we're going to do independent living. 8-1 talks about how to find a place to live. 8-2 is about reading a floor plan. 8-3 is the mortgage application process. 8-4 is purchasing a home. And then the last one is rentals, condominiums, and cooperatives. For 8-1, finding a place to live, we're going to calculate the affordability of monthly rent, determine the relationship between square footage and monthly rent, and determine lease signing costs, and calculate moving expenses. Our key terms: the apartment. This is a home that is rented or leased by the people that live in it, also called a rental property. The tenant, this is the person renting the apartment. The landlord is the person that owns the property, that rents it out. If an apartment is unfurnished, that means that no furniture is provided with the rental, so you have to provide your own couch and chairs and all of that stuff. Furnished means that the landlord's furniture is included in the rental cost, so you don't have to bring anything with you. Lease is a written agreement between the landlord and the tenant that details the amount of rent and the length of time you will rent the apartment. Expire, this is when the signed lease ends. Sometimes they're month to month, sometimes they are year to year, or sometimes they are even longer than that. Evict, this means the act of legally forcing a tenant to leave a rental property for failure to pay the rent or follow the rules and regulations of the lease agreement. A single family home, this is a home where one family is allowed to live or able to live. Square footage, this indicates how much floor space is available in a living space, so the livable area of the house. Application deposit, this is money that covers the cost of processing the application for the rental. Security deposit is the money given to the landlord from the tenant as protection in the event that the tenant causes damage to the rented property. Refunded when the tenant moves out if there is no damage, and can range from 1 to 4 months rent. So where will you live? Where will you think you'll be living in a few years? Are you going to be on a college campus? Are you still going to be living at home? Are you getting an apartment and working after graduation? So where do you think you're going to be in a few years? Why do people rent rather than purchase? What are some of the reasons why they would rent an apartment or a house versus purchasing something? So go ahead and finish this. And yes, you're going to answer this on a separate sheet of paper or submit it online. So examples. Example 1, Alex makes $61,992 per year and pays about 25% of his gross monthly income in federal and state taxes. He wants to find an apartment to rent. Estimate how much he can afford to pay for rent each month. Then determine how much money he will have after taxes and rent are paid. So we use 28% of gross monthly income generally as a good area for rent payments, is a good average. So how do we do this? First, we need to divide his annual salary by 12 months. So we take $61,992 and divide that by 12, and we end up with $5,166. Number 2, we find 28% of his gross monthly income for rent. So 28% of his gross monthly income. And we end up with $1,446.48. Then we find 25% of his gross monthly income for taxes. So we take 25% of what he makes in a month, and we have $1,291.50. And then finally we find the amount remaining after rent and taxes each month. So we take his gross monthly income minus his allotted percentage for rent minus what he pays for taxes, and you get an answer. So I should see all of these in your notes, and then you need to finish that subtraction piece in number 4 and get your final answer. For the check your understanding, Bethany's monthly gross income is $3,840. She pays 24% of her monthly gross earnings in federal and state taxes and 15% for her student loan. Bethany uses 15% of her monthly gross income to pay toward her credit card balance. She wants to rent an apartment that will cost $1,800 per month. Will she be able to make the payments without changing the amounts she pays toward her student loans and credit card balances? So you're going to need to finish this question in your notes. Same as the previous one, except we have an extra deduction in there. So when you do your subtraction, you're going to be looking for, does she have an extra $1,800 a month left in order to rent the apartment that she wants? So go ahead and finish this in your notes, and then you also need to turn this in on a separate sheet of paper or online. For example 2, Rufus and Maria have both been offered new jobs in different cities. A real estate broker sent them a listing of apartments in their desired location showing the square footage in each apartment. Use linear regression analysis to determine if there is a correlation between the square footage of rental property and the amount charged for monthly rent. What is the linear regression equation? And then interpret the correlation coefficient. So we've done this. So you need to take your chart, okay, and your square footage is your L1 and your monthly rent is your L2 in your calculator. So again, to do that, we have to enter the data into L1 and L2. So we go to Stat, Edit, and then in L1 and L2, enter the information. And then we need to do our calculations. So we go back to Stat, over to Calculate, and we need to do 2 var stats. And we need to go down to line reg, or LINREG, where it's y equals AX plus B. And when you do that, your calculator should display this value for you. Okay, so it's y equals 0.9x plus 403. And then your correlation coefficient is your R value, 0.96. Now remember, the closer you are to 1, the more of a correlation there is. So when you graph this, remember you have to change your zoom stat. Okay, when you graph this, this is what your calculator should display for you. And you'll notice that that line is pretty close to all of those dots. There's a couple that are off of it, but it's a pretty good determination that as the square footage increases, the monthly rent is going to increase. So the more space you have, the more it's going to cost you. Further check your understanding. Based on example 2, what is a good estimate for the amount of monthly rent charged for an 880 square foot apartment? So here's the information when you ran that through your calculator. So you have your A value, you have your B value. Okay, you're going to finish this in your notes. You're also going to turn this question in as well. So you have your Y equals, substitute your A, substitute your B, and now they want to know for an 800 square foot apartment, what is the rent going to be? So remember that your X value was the square footage and your Y value was the rent that they are going to charge you. Example 3. In this one, Rufus and Maria paid a $200 application deposit for the 1,150 square foot apartment in example 2. They are required to provide a credit report that costs $25 and pay a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. The landlord also requires that last month's rent at the time of signing the lease. The broker charged 10% of the yearly rent. How much should they expect to pay to be able to move into the apartment? So all of these fees in here, we need to figure out what they're going to totally cost. So again, here's where they are. They were in the 1,150 square foot apartment, so their monthly rent is $1,595. We're going to need that value. So we have the application deposit, which is $200. We have the credit report fee, which was $25. We need to pay security deposit equal to 1 month's rent, which according to the chart was $1,595. Then we have last month's rent, so we have to be a month. We have to catch up for a month, so that's another $1,595. And then the broker fee is 10% of the whole year's worth of rent. So we have to take, multiply 10% by 1,595 times 12, which comes out to $1,914. The first month's rent we also have to do once we move in. So what is the total amount that they expect to pay to be able to move into this apartment? So total means you're going to, that's right, you're going to add. So go ahead and finish these questions as well as doing them on a separate sheet of paper. Check your understanding. We're going to go ahead and skip this question, so you need to skip, write skip in your notes, please. For example 4, lots of words in this one, but we can handle it. We're actually going to end up doing a system of equations for this one. So Jay is moving from an apartment in Miami to one in Orlando. If Jay moves on a weekday, he will need more movers' time to pack, load, unload, and unpack because his friends will not be able to help him. If he moves on a weekend, he can get his friends to help, cutting down on the number of hours he will need to hire movers. Move Out is a moving company that supplies movers, trucks, and moving equipment. They have given him the following moving estimates. So during a weekday, 6 hours of loading and unloading and 5 hours of packing and unpacking will cost him a total of $720. On a weekend, if he can get his friends to help, 4 hours of loading and unloading, 2 hours of packing and unpacking is $400. They charge a set hourly rate for loading and unloading and a different set hourly for moving and packing or unpacking. We need to determine their hourly rates for loading and unloading, and packing and unpacking. So I'm going to bring up another slide here where I have a little less writing and more where we can do our calculations. So we set up two equations. We're going to let x equal the cost for the hours of loading and unloading, and y is the hours, the cost for hours packing and unpacking. So 6 times the cost plus 5 times the cost for packing and unpacking equals $720. So I want to get my y value by itself. So I'm going to move the 6x over, so I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides, and then divide everything by 5. And I get a pretty little equation, y equals negative 6/5 x plus 144. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So take a minute, pause the video, see if you can come up with the equation. So you should have 4x plus 2y equals 400. And then 2y equals negative 4x plus 400. And then when you divide everything by 2, you end up with y equals negative 2x plus 200. You now have two beautiful y equals equations. So you're going to go ahead and plug each equation into your graphing calculator and look for their intersection point. So you can either do calculate, intersect, or you can scroll through your table and find out what your x and your y values are. So you need to go ahead and finish this question in your notes, please. The check your understanding, we're going to go ahead and skip this, so please write skip in your notes. And on to example 5. Samantha is moving from Madison, Wisconsin to La Crosse, Wisconsin. She will do all of the packing and unpacking by herself with her brother. The moving company quoted a price of $1,250 for 8 hours of loading and unloading and driving 130 miles. The company quoted the same price if the truck drives an extra 30 miles to pick up Samantha's brother. Samantha figures that with her brother's help, she only needs to hire the movers for 6 hours. How much does the company charge per hour for loading and unloading? How much do they charge per mile for driving? So again, I'm going to pull up another slide here so we have some more space. So y is the cost per mile. X is going to be your cost per hour. So I'm going to set up my two equations again. 8x plus 130y equals 1250, and 6x plus 160y equals 1250. Now this is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to graph these. We're actually going to do the elimination method. So I'm going to either add or subtract these equations to make one of my variables disappear. But the problem here, neither one of my coefficients on either one of my variables matches. But I can do an operation to make them both look the same. So I would like to get rid of the x's because they're smaller numbers, a little bit easier to deal with. What number do 6 and 8 have in common that I can turn them both into? And if you said 24, you are absolutely correct. So what do I need to multiply the first equation by to make my x a 24? And if you said 3, you are correct. And the bottom one would be, that's right, a 4. So we're going to multiply each equation so that one variable has the same coefficient. So I multiply the first one by 3 and the second one by 4. From here, I distribute those values through, and these are what my new equations look like. Now, my coefficients here are both 24s. They're both the same sign. They're both positive. So I am going to subtract the equations to eliminate the x, and then I'm going to solve for y. So when I subtract, those cancel out. 390y take away 640y is negative 250y. And then when I take 3750 minus 5000, I end up with negative 1250. And then when I divide both of those, I end up with y equals 5. Okay, so the cost per mile is $5. So we just figured out how much they charge for the per mile. To figure out the cost per hour, we're going to do that next in your check your understanding. If you graph the two equations, what is the point of intersection? So this is going to get you not only the rest of the ordered pair, but it's also going to tell you where these two intersect one another. So if I take these two equations and I substitute 5 in for y and solve for x in one of the original equations, and you will have the x, y where the graphs intersect. So take my 5, plug it in for y, I'll do it in the top one, and then solve for x. So go ahead and finish this in your notes, please, so I should see more than just what I have typed in here for you. And that's the end of 8-1.